Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The secret between Claire and Kane had been like a tightly wound spring, coiled and dangerous, each passing day adding more tension until the weight of it pressed on both of them like a storm waiting to break, and though on the surface they wore masks of calm sophistication, beneath those carefully painted expressions was a chaos that neither could keep bottled up forever, for when passion and secrecy collide in the kind of combustible way it had with them, there is no permanent silence, only a temporary reprieve before the inevitable explosion, and now that explosion was looming closer than either dared to admit, a whisper of truth hanging in the air of Genoa City like the faint crackle before a lightning strike, ready to sear everything in its path, because Claire, with her calculated poise and an ambition that had long driven her every decision, was suddenly confronted with something she could not control, something that could unravel her plans in ways she hadn't predicted. A pregnancy, unplanned yet undeniable, the one twist in her carefully curated narrative that threatened to expose her affair with Kane Ashby, a man who himself was balancing precariously on the knife edge of desire, guilt, and the quiet yearning for something he didn't even realize he was missing until Claire came along, igniting a spark in him that Phyllis could sense, that Lily would eventually stumble across, that everyone who knew Kane's history of temptation would be quick to suspect, for no matter how hard he tried to convince himself otherwise, the truth was written in every stolen glance and in every whispered conversation exchanged in hushed corners of the Grand Phoenix, where Claire often orchestrated their meetings under the guise of business but with eyes that spoke volumes more than her words ever did. And while both of them might have believed at first that their secret was theirs to protect, they were fools to think the walls of this town didn't have ears, that secrets could stay buried forever, because in Genoa City secrets were currency, traded like stocks, wielded like weapons, and inevitably turned against the very people who tried hardest to shield themselves from exposure. Kane, for all his charm and smooth-talking ability, wasn't blind to the magnitude of what had just shifted between them the moment Claire confessed her suspicion that she was carrying his child, and though she hadn't taken the test when she first uttered the words, the certainty in her voice when she finally admitted it sent his mind spiraling, his heart hammering against his chest as if it were trying to escape, because this wasn't just another affair, another lapse in judgment that could be covered with half-truths and denials. This was tangible, undeniable, life-altering, a pregnancy that could not be explained away, a pregnancy that would rip the veil off their connection no matter how carefully they tried to sew it back together, and in that moment Kane felt both terror and a strange flicker of hope, the terror rooted in the inevitability of confrontation with Lily, the children, and the entire Abbott Newman Chancellor circle, while the hope was something far more dangerous, a quiet yearning that maybe, just maybe, this child could be the one thing that gave meaning to his chaos, the one bond that tied him to Claire beyond the stolen heat of nights where they pretended they were free from the consequences waiting at dawn. Claire, however, was not as easily swayed by emotion, at least not outwardly, for she knew the game of power better than anyone. Her life had been a series of calculated moves, every relationship, every opportunity, every betrayal weighed and measured against what it could gain her, and yet, when it came to Kane, something in her had shifted, something real had crept in despite her best attempts to keep it locked away, and now she found herself facing the most primal reality of all, the possibility of motherhood, not as an abstract dream of some distant future but as an immediate, urgent truth growing inside her, one that tied her fate to Kane's in ways that scared her even more than the risk of exposure. Were they happy about it? That question didn't have a simple answer. For happiness in situations like theirs is not a clean, uncomplicated emotion but a twisted knot of longing, fear, excitement, and dread all tangled together, and while Kane, in fleeting moments when he allowed himself to imagine holding a child with Claire's eyes and a smile, could feel a warmth he hadn't felt in years, he was equally suffocated by the weight of the destruction such a child would bring to every other corner of his life, while Claire, who prided herself on always being 2 steps ahead of everyone else, was now standing on unstable ground, no longer fully in control of the story, and that loss of control made her angry, vulnerable, and yet strangely alive, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just chasing power or revenge or survival, she was facing something real, raw, and terrifyingly human, And that reality threatened to crack open the steel armor she had built around herself. The looming reveal of their secret was inevitable, for secrets like this, especially in a town like Genoa City, have a way of unraveling whether those who hold them are ready or not, and already, the signs were creeping into the edges of their carefully guarded world. Phyllis noticing the way Kane lingered a little too long when Claire brushed past him. Lily catching a flicker of something unspoken in Kane's eyes when Claire's name came up in conversation, and whispers around town about Claire's sudden absences, her distracted demeanor, her subtle yet noticeable glow that had nothing to do with ambition and everything to do with new life stirring inside her. The question that haunted them both, in those quiet hours when the mask slipped and they could no longer lie to themselves, was not just whether they were happy about the pregnancy but whether they were ready for the storm that would come with it, the storm that would rip through every fragile alliance, every delicate truce, every fragile bridge Kane had tried to rebuild with his family, because once the truth came out, there would be no turning back, no pretending this was just another mistake. Swept under the rug, and as much as they both wanted to hold on to the secret a little longer, they could feel the clock ticking, each second pushing them closer to the moment when the world would know, when the judgment would fall, when the lives of everyone around them would be shattered by the revelation that Claire and Kane, bound by desire and now by the possibility of a child, had been living a lie in plain sight. And perhaps the cruelest irony of all was that buried beneath the guilt and the fear and the calculation was a small, fragile flicker of joy, a joy neither dared admit out loud, because to admit it would make it real, and to make it real would mean accepting not just the child but the war that came with it, a war they might not survive intact but one that had already begun the moment Claire whispered the truth that neither of them could escape. And as the days bled into nights, and the nights into mornings filled with restless silences and unanswered questions, Claire and Kane's secret grew heavier, not just in metaphor but in reality, with Claire now fully aware that her late-night sickness, her sudden fatigue, her uncharacteristic hesitations in the middle of conversations were no longer coincidences or products of stress, they were signs, undeniable signs, that she was indeed carrying Kane's child, and though she had finally taken the test in the privacy of her own suite, staring at the two pink lines with a mixture of awe and dread, she hadn't yet found the courage to place that truth fully into Kane's hands, for she knew the moment she said the words out loud, their secret would shift from dangerous to catastrophic, because Kane was already teetering between the pull of his old life with Lily and the allure of the forbidden one with her, and news of a baby would snap that fragile balance in half, thrusting them both into a reality they might not be ready for. A reality where whispers would turn into accusations, accusations into confrontations, and confrontations into choices that would rip lives apart, and while Claire had built her identity on strength and decisiveness, she suddenly felt the fragility of her situation in ways she never imagined, because for all her ambitions, she had never factored motherhood into her plans, never pictured herself holding a baby that carried not just her DNA but the DNA of a man whose past was riddled with infidelity, betrayal, and broken promises, and yet here she was, standing on the precipice of something so irreversible that even she, with all her calculated control, couldn't script the ending. Kane, on the other hand, was spiraling in his own way, haunted by the ghost of Lily's steady gaze, by the memory of his children's laughter, by the haunting thought that he was about to once again become the man everyone accused him of being, the man who couldn't stay faithful, who couldn't control his impulses, who always chose passion over stability, and though he tried to rationalize his connection with Claire as something deeper, something more meaningful than the fleeting affairs of his past, he knew in the pit of his stomach that no one in Genoa City would ever see it that way, not Lily, not Jill, not even himself when he stripped away the excuses and stared at the truth, and yet, the thought of Claire carrying his child stirred something inside him he couldn't quite dismiss, a flicker of pride, of belonging, of the possibility that maybe this child could anchor him in ways nothing else ever had, but even that fragile hope was poisoned by the inevitable destruction it would. 'Cause once the secret slipped free, because in this town secrets always did, and every time he looked into Claire's eyes he saw not just the thrill of what they shared but the shadow of the fallout waiting in the wings. Phyllis, with her ever-watchful eye and uncanny ability to sniff out trouble, had already begun connecting the dots, catching the subtle shifts in Kane's behavior, the way he defended Claire a little too quickly in casual conversations, the way he lingered by the bar at the Grand Phoenix even when he had no business there, and though she hadn't yet voiced her suspicions, her silence was not a gift but a warning, for Phyllis Summers never stayed silent long, and the moment she had proof, or even the shadow of proof, she would unleash it with the kind of precision that could eviscerate reputations in seconds, and both Claire and Kane knew it, which only added to the suffocating tension between them. Every touch, every look, every secret meeting laced with the fear that this could be the one that undid them. Lily, meanwhile, though not yet aware of the full extent of what was brewing, had begun to feel the cracks in the foundation of her tentative reconciliation with Kane, her intuition whispering to her that something was off, that the man she was trying to trust again was once more keeping secrets, and though she pushed those thoughts aside in favor of giving him the benefit of the doubt, the day would come soon when those whispers would become undeniable roars, and when they did, her fury would not just be at Kane but at Claire, the woman she had cautiously tried to accept into the fold, never realizing that she was inviting a snake into her circle, a woman who now carried a child that could forever bind Kane to her in ways Lily could never undo. The cruel irony of it all was that amid the guilt and fear, there were fleeting moments of tenderness between Claire and Kane, moments when they allowed themselves to imagine a future that wasn't defined by scandal or secrecy, a future where the baby could grow up in a home filled with love rather than whispers of betrayal. But those moments were fleeting, crushed beneath the reality that Genoa City was a town built on exposure, a town where secrets weren't just revealed, they were weaponized, twisted, and thrown back at you until you bled. And Claire knew better than most how quickly allies could turn into enemies when the scent of blood was in the air. She had seen it happen time and again, and though she prided herself on being prepared for every eventuality, she wasn't sure she could prepare for this, because this wasn't just about her, it was about Kane, about Lily, about Jill, about the children, about the tangled web of connections that defined life in this city, and once the secret slipped free, there would be no controlling the narrative, no spinning it in her favor. Because pregnancy was a truth that left evidence, that grew more undeniable with every passing week, and the very idea of it being dragged into the open before she was ready filled her with a dread she didn't dare show, even to Kane. And so she wore her mask, as she always had, playing the part of the woman in control, the woman who could handle anything, while inside she was unraveling in ways she had never admitted to anyone, not even herself, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting for survival or ambition, she was fighting for the possibility of something more, something terrifyingly real, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to face it. And the more time passed, the more that secret swelled inside of Claire, not only in her body but in her mind, as if every breath she took carried the weight of what she had not yet said. And Kane, though outwardly composed in the way he always was when maneuvering through lies, began to feel that silent pressure too, an invisible tether pulling tighter with each lie told to those around them, because every conversation with Lily was a minefield, every accidental glance across a crowded room a potential explosion, and the unspoken question haunted them both. When the truth finally came out, who would they be standing with, and who would be standing against them? Kane wrestled with it in moments of solitude, his conscience waging war with his desires, because he wanted to believe that he could be happy about this child, that he could embrace the idea of new life with Claire as a blessing rather than a catastrophe, but each time he thought about his children with Lily, about the stability he had promised them after so many mistakes, the guilt stabbed deeper, reminding him that happiness couldn't come from destruction without leaving scars, and his life was already littered with scars from past decisions he had made when desire overruled reason. Claire, for her part, was more pragmatic on the surface, telling herself that she could bend this situation to her advantage the way she always had with every challenge life threw at her, yet beneath that steely veneer she was terrified in a way she had never been before, because unlike business deals or manipulative schemes, this was not something she could control with charm or strategy, this was human, this was raw, this was a baby, and though she hadn't planned it, hadn't even wanted it at first, she found herself, against her own instincts, placing a protective hand against her stomach in the quiet moments, acknowledging the reality that this child was already changing her in ways she hadn't anticipated, softening her edges even as the fear of being exposed hardened her resolve. The air in Genoa City seemed charged, as though the walls themselves knew something seismic was about to shatter the fragile calm, and those closest to Kane and Claire could already sense the undercurrents, though they didn't yet know the full truth. Phyllis, sharp as ever, began planting her suspicions in subtle ways, casually dropping Claire's name into conversations with Kane just to watch his reaction, filing away the flicker of panic that crossed his face before he smoothed it over with his trademark charm. Jill, ever perceptive, had also noticed Kane's distracted demeanor during their family conversations, interpreting it as a relapse into old habits, though she couldn't yet put her finger on the specific cause. And Lily, poor Lily, felt it most of all, the creeping suspicion that history was repeating itself, that the trust she had cautiously extended to Kane was once again being tested, though she fought against her instincts because she wanted to believe he had changed, wanted to believe that the man she had loved for so long could finally put his family above temptation. But instincts in Genoa City were rarely wrong, and Lily's unease grew stronger with each passing day, even as she told herself she was imagining it. Meanwhile, Claire found herself caught in the strangest limbo. She had never imagined that the possibility of motherhood would stir something almost hopeful in her, yet it did, and though she wasn't ready to admit it to anyone, not even Kane, the thought of bringing new life into a world that had given her so much pain and betrayal carried with it a fragile promise, a possibility that she could create something pure amid the wreckage of her choices. But that fragile hope was constantly crushed beneath the awareness that the baby's existence would expose her affair with Kane in the most irreversible way possible, for there would be no denying the truth once her body revealed what she was trying so hard to hide, and in a town as small and observant as this one, secrets written in flesh could not be disguised for long. Kane tried to reassure her in his quiet moments, tried to tell her that they would figure it out together, but even as he said the words, she could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing everything he had left, and she hated him for it even as she loved him, because his hesitation reminded her that she had taken a gamble on a man whose loyalty had always been divided, and though he cared for her, perhaps even loved her in his flawed, conflicted way, she knew a part of him would always be tethered to Lily, to the life he had built and destroyed and tried to rebuild again. That tether made her resentful, but it also made her realize the enormity of what they were facing. No matter how much they tried to deny it, the pregnancy was not just a private matter, it was a public revelation waiting to detonate. And as whispers began to spread around town about Claire's sudden absences, her subtle changes in appearance, her softer demeanor, the storm gathered momentum, each day pushing them closer to the inevitable reveal, and though neither Claire nor Kane was ready, fate rarely waited for readiness in Genoa City. The question of whether they were happy about the pregnancy became less about happiness and more about survival, whether their bond was strong enough to withstand the firestorm that was about to engulf them, whether they could stand together when everyone else turned against them, whether the fragile flicker of hope they both felt could survive being drowned out by the tidal wave of judgment that was about to come crashing down. And deep down, they both knew the answer was uncertain, for happiness in a situation like this was not a destination but a fleeting moment, a fragile spark in the darkness, and though they clung to it when they could, they also braced themselves for the inevitable truth. Their secret was about to be revealed, and when it was, happiness would not be the first thing that followed, it would be chaos, heartbreak, and perhaps, if they were lucky enough to survive it, the possibility of rebuilding something new from the ashes. And so the question of whether Claire and Kane were happy about the pregnancy twisted itself into something far more complicated than either of them could articulate, because happiness in this context was not joy untainted but rather a fragile sliver of light peeking through the cracks of fear, and though there were moments when Kane allowed himself to imagine a fresh start, holding a newborn child with Claire by his side, proving to himself and everyone else that he could be more than the man defined by his mistakes, those moments were fleeting, drowned out by the dread of what Lily would say, what Jill would think, what his children would feel when they realized their father had once again betrayed the foundation of their family. Claire, too, wrestled with her own contradictions, because for every moment she rested her hand against her stomach and felt a strange sense of calm, of destiny even, there were 10 more when panic overwhelmed her, when she thought about the judgment that would rain down once her secret was exposed, when she pictured the look in Lily's eyes as the truth set in, when she realized that Phyllis was already circling like a predator sensing weakness. And yet, amid all the fear, Claire couldn't deny that she was beginning to love what was happening inside her, even though she had never believed motherhood was part of her path, because this child, Kane's child, represented not only a consequence of her choices but also the possibility of redemption, of grounding, of creating something that belonged only to her in a world that constantly tried to strip her of control. Kane saw those fleeting soft expressions cross Claire's face when she thought no one was watching, and they terrified him even as they moved him, because they reminded him that this wasn't a game anymore, wasn't a fling or a scandal waiting to be swept under a rug. This was life, this was permanent, and no matter what story they tried to spin,